Initiating moisture.
It's been a while since the last video game moist meter, but I thought Remnant from the Ashes was a perfect one to dip my dick back into it. Remnant from the Ashes is from Gunfire Games, known for the Darksiders series, one of the series that's near and dear to my boners. I'm a huge fan of Darksiders. Despite it having obvious design flaws, clunky mechanics at its core, it is just truly a super fun franchise that I'm very much into. So I was really hoping Gunfire could capture me again and bring out that boyish wonder and joy that Darksiders brought out of me with Remnant. And it does. I really much enjoy Remnant from the Ashes. There's definitely some issues with the game, however for $40 you get a massive game with a ton of replayability and just a lot of fucking fun that is good with friends as well. You're tossed into a universe overrun with evil shit and sent on a mission that spans across multiple different worlds with multiple different types of enemies, and all of it feels pretty fun. Sometimes the environments are really bland, just a standard decrepit city you've seen 1,000 times with shit on the cars, shit on the ground, poopy everywhere, and then some regular enemies wandering around. But then you explore other worlds, you get some really nice looking shit. There's even a world that reminds me of one of the engineer's ships in Prometheus as you're exploring around, and I really appreciated that aesthetic. I think the game at times can be very nice looking, although overall the graphical look of the game isn't the best. That's going to be the first thing most people notice. It's a AA game. It's not a AAA game, and I think the industry needs more games like Remnant, the AA projects, the passion projects that put their emphasis on the gameplay and the mechanics being fun rather than making sure all the characters look photorealistic with dynamic sweat beads dripping down their face. And that's exactly what Remnant does. It's a fun game. I wouldn't say it's a great action game, but it certainly is a fun one, especially at its price point. You get a lot of content, there's a lot of different weapons, and it's all procedurally generated, it's randomized, so your first playthrough will be different than your second playthrough. You'll get different bosses, different loot from those bosses, can build different weapons, get different weapon mods. The system is actually pretty deep, allowing for a lot of different builds. You can go for a melee-focused build that one-shots the enemies using different melee weapons that you'll find along the way. There's also a trait system where you get different trait cards that you put trait points into, which is just your level up points. You put them into the traits, which drastically change damage numbers, reload speed, stamina, weak spot, experience gained, etc. Then you can upgrade the weapons themselves using the materials you find in the world and the enemies you kill along the way. The system is a lot of fun and allows for a lot of diversity in what you're building and what you're trying to focus on. Although I don't think melee is a very viable option, considering some of the bosses are unable to even be meleeed because they're fucking flying, and you can't exactly like Superman out to them and beat their shit in for their lunch money. But everything else seems like it has a strong place in the game, although there is some hit detection issues, especially with the crossbow. There'd be times where I'd put the crossbow right on someone's tits, fire, and it just goes right through. I don't know if it was with the co-op because maybe there was a latency issue, but it's something that I noticed happen pretty often, specifically with the crossbow. And since I mentioned the co-op, I'll go ahead and touch on that. The co-op is fun. It works. There is a lag issue, but that's to be expected. It's a lot of fun when you're working with friends, melting shit and running this shit through, speed running it. And if you're playing solo, there's just a lot of meat to go through. It took me roughly 10 hours and some change. I did the whole thing on twitch.tv/moistcritical, and even that wasn't entirely solo. I had a friend come help me multiple times who just wanted to hop in and out. Now don't get this misconstrued, it's not because I needed the help in the game. That's something I'll touch on. Running through at the normal difficulty, the default difficulty, the game is not overly challenging. There were a few bosses that took me 5+ tries, but never more than like 10. You're not going to be struggling overly long on any specific boss, and if you have a friend with you or just a random person join on you, it's pretty much a guaranteed one phase, one shot if you're playing on normal. Playing on a higher difficulty is going to take you a longer time. I've beaten the game once in that 10.5 hours, and I've gone back and played through a couple different times for a few more hours worth to really get my feet wet on higher difficulties, and I can say it is a pretty drastic difference. Now, I'd like to point out one of the main things about this game that I had a bit of an issue with, and it's something that a lot of you probably won't even care about since most people compare this to a Dark Souls type game anyway. It's the narrative. It seems like they wanted to tell a story, and you have to go out of your way to find most of the story elements in the game. It doesn't really beat you over the head with it, and that's totally fine with me. On my first playthrough, admittedly, I just kind of ignored all that and focused more on the gameplay, but I went back, tried to understand the story, and it's not overly well put together. The writing at times is a bit juvenile. The voice acting's, it feels like most of the actors phoned it in. However, the biggest gripe I have with it is the game doesn't have an ending. Apparently, the ending is planned for a free DLC drop, which doesn't exactly forgive it, because why ship a game that doesn't end? It just abruptly rolls credits to a scene that doesn't make any sense. And for a lot of you, probably won't care too much about that, but it's definitely something to take note of. You're not going to really be understanding why you're killing those certain things and what the fuck is going on narratively, but you'll probably still be having fun anyway, just killing shit. And the last complaint to point out about the game is it feels really stiff, which is to be expected from a AA game, but it's worth noting it does feel super clunky at times, especially during some of the tight quarters boss fights. You'll feel like you got robbed because there is a lot of phasing where if someone's weapon or shot hits a wall, it'll oftentimes just go through and fucking clock you in the nutsack anyway. And it's that clunkiness that I feel translates to some of the bosses, because a lot of the times the bosses don't have any interesting mechanics in how to fight them. What makes a boss hard at points is that it'll spawn like a million ads, just a whole bunch of little minions that you have to wave clear, so that's a little frustrating as well. And that coupled with the occasional stiff controls and the occasional bullshit where you're pretty sure you dove at the right time but you still got killed mid-animation, it leads to a bit of a frustrating experience here and there, but it's not an overly massive thing, it's not overly frequent, it's just something worth pointing out. Plugging Remnant from the Ashes into the moist meter, I'm giving it a 75%. I did enjoy the game. I don't think it's overly great or one of the best Souls-like games, which is the genre this falls into apparently, but it is a good experience worth playing with friends, and for $40 you get a lot out of it, especially if you're a fan of the combat formula. There's just a whole lot here to like. I'm happy Gunfire's doing more than Darksiders, though I am still very much hoping for a Darksiders 4 in the near future. That's about it. See ya.